Hi there, everyone. We are with the National Weather Desk, meteorologist Emily Gracie, and I have meteorologist Matt Ritter here as well. And we're here to give you a little update. 2 p.m. update came in from the National Hurricane Center a short time ago about, of course, everybody's talking about Hurricane Idalia, and it's getting closer and closer to Florida. In fact, those bands are starting to reach Florida. So we're going to share some info with you here this afternoon so that you can be nice and prepared. Matt, it's been a little bit of a crazy day.
Yeah, and look at this. I mean, this storm is still what hundreds of miles offshore, and these outer bands are already bringing tornadoes to the west coast of Florida. Tornado warnings already posted for the Naples area. Just
Wow.
a lot of folks tend to focus on the center. You see all those graphics that go viral on the web, and they focus on the exact center of the storm. This center is nowhere near the coast, and it's already bringing tornadoes to Florida.
Yeah, I want to pull up the radar here and we'll give you guys the latest. That 2 p.m. update, the winds are now up to 90 miles per hour. That's up from 85 with that 11 a.m. update. It's still moving to the north about 14 miles per hour, so it hasn't started that slight turn to the northeast yet, but we weren't expecting that anyway. It's about 240 miles right now southwest of Tampa, Florida, and you can see Tampa's already getting those outer bands that rain. And as Matt mentioned, of course, there's tornado threat already popping up there for Florida. Anytime we see these storms interact with land, that friction between the system and the land certainly can cause that tornado risk. So that's where it is right now. Starting to see a better defined eye. And of course, we're not really seeing the west side of this thing because it is being picked up on radar here with this image. But the satellite imagery really starting to show it come together with that eye in the last few frames, starting to get a little bit more distinct, but certainly moving away from Cuba. I think they've discontinued all those watches and warnings now for Cuba as
Uh,
it's moving
they have,
away.
yeah. So no threat anymore to Cuba. It is interesting to note that we can see the eye on radar imagery. There's definitely a lack of rain in the center of the storm, uh, it- but looking at the visible satellite imagery, it's the eye is still not well formed, at least on the satellite. It's trying though. It's
Hmm.
definitely trying.
Yeah, I want to pull up a live camera here from Florida. This is Key West, Florida, the southernmost point, if you're familiar with Key West at all. And we've seen people have been out there all day, kind of getting close to the edge of the water, and I keep seeing them getting hit with waves. So certainly they're getting smacked there left and right with those waves. Not exactly safe to be out there, but you can see on that radar, Key West certainly getting their share of those bands coming through already. So let's pull up here the
Yeah.
latest on some of these graphics that the Hurricane Center puts out. They do the full advisory a couple times a day, so we're kind of in an intermediate advisory here. But updates with this advisory, it's affecting Florida, as we already heard. They've discontinued some watches and warnings for some areas of Cuba, and they did update the cone. We haven't seen too much of a shift in the cone, but this is as of 2 p.m. Still expecting it to be a major hurricane at landfall. And as you can see right there, the M major hurricane, that's category 3 or above. And they're saying likely a category 3, strong category 3, close to that category 4 status. But of course, we always encourage everybody to focus a little bit more on the impacts and that exact location because as you heard, there's already impacts being felt across that west coast of Florida.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting to note the National Weather Service office from Tallahassee put out a tweet earlier this afternoon. There's no historical precedent if this makes, again, back to the exact center. If the exact center of the storm makes landfall as Category 3 or higher in Appalachia Bay specifically, not the whole Bend area, but the Bay specifically, there's no historical precedent for it,
Hmm.
which means that in the Appalachia Bay itself, they've never seen this before. We don't know from history what exactly the damage is going to be.
I mean, if there's any silver lining here, I'd say it's all these like the national forest and the wildlife
Yes.
management area. So hopefully a little less populated, perhaps, and other spots a little bit farther to the west. But we're talking about here's Apalachicola right here, and this is the bay we're talking about right here, where we're looking at potential landfall. Really, they've narrowed it down. A lot of folks have been talking about Cedar Key as well. That's Cedar Key right there, and it looks like it will be likely just to the east. I mean, there we could still see some minor changes up until landfall. So of course, all of these areas at risk of surge. And whenever you get the coastline like this, you get water that just kind of shoves into one little area too, which is very dangerous. So the surge, a major concern, anywhere from 10 to 15 feet above ground. So that's, basically a wall of water that we're talking about there.
Yeah, and when it does make landfall, really, areas from Gainesville all the way up to Jacksonville will have to worry about the tornadic potential as well.
Yep. Yep. Of course, those inland tornadoes.
I think,
And also noteworthy the surge threat on the east coast here. So all the way from northern Florida, all the way up through South Carolina and into North Carolina, all the way up to Surf City, North Carolina. There's that threat of some storm surge as well. And we've been talking about the full moon, always plays a role. So some areas, depending on when the high tides are, could be looking at a high tide plus a surge situation.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm concerned about the tornadic potential for Georgia and South Carolina as well. All
Yeah.
those outer bands basically hitting the surge hitting the coast at a 90-degree angle. There's going to be a lot of spin ups, I think.
Yeah, I was hoping to pull up this map to kind of show you where the storm surge threat was going to be, but it's a little slow. So let's talk about rainfall for a second, too, because inland flooding is going to be a huge concern. I mean, we could be talking rainfall totals upwards of like widespread 4 to 8 inches, and then isolated areas up to a foot. I mean, it's not out of the question to see that. This is a 3-day total map that we're looking at, but you can see that swath there that goes all the way from wherever it makes landfall all the way up through Georgia. I mean, places like Augusta, Columbia could see the most rain just because of the forward movement and where it is. And then certainly some spots in the low country. We've talked about this, flood easily. I mean, places in North Carolina that dealt with it for Florence. The storm itself wasn't, a major hurricane, but
Yeah.
it dumped so much rainfall just because of how slow it moved.
Yeah, and Eastern North Carolina is probably not getting enough attention for the impacts from this storm. And of course, right, the speed once it finally moves inland will determine how much rainfall these spots ultimately get. But it's definitely going to be on the heavy side.
Yeah, let's talk about that on the. I've got the GFS pulled up here. Um, we're just kind of getting in the latest run. I might have to pull back to the last run, but just to give you a timeline of landfall. So we're looking at tonight at this point, and you can see it. Obviously, Franklin off the coast there as well. We could talk about that in a minute. That's been downgraded a tad. But Idalia, they're getting close to the Gulf Coast tonight, and then overnight, and then early tomorrow morning. So this is tomorrow morning. We're looking at a landfall shortly after sunrise. It'll be during those morning hours, moving onshore. And this computer model, this is the American computer model, does have it moving on right about that spot we were talking about, right there in the Big Bend, just west of Cedar Key, and then moving over Georgia, just dumping rain on southern portions of Georgia through the afternoon tomorrow, and then into South Carolina through the afternoon and evening tomorrow. That center, they could still be looking at tropical storm force winds, even in these inland areas. That's why there's tropical storm warnings in place for South Carolina's coastline. And then the funny part, Matt, and if you look at the latest cone, which I want to go back to, that little bubble there at the end, that always indicates like either very much slowing down or kind of just coming to a halt whenever we see that big bubble at the end of the cone. And that's kind of what we're looking at here in
Yeah,
the computer model. It's just kind
and
of,
it also means there's a lot more uncertainty
yes.
now. Past that certain time period.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think the cone means the storm is going to grow with time, and that
Mm.
no, that it means the uncertainty of the path has grown
Yeah.
with time.
But it doesn't look
Yeah,
like a major threat after that, but it
no,
does look like it kind of lingers just as a remnant low there off the coast for a little while. So
yeah,
something we'll watch for potential rainfall. I mean, next
the,
week.
the
Um,
GF right, the GFS wants to now do a little loop, but
yeah,
luckily it doesn't
it's
strengthen it
back.
again.
Yeah, right, exactly. And of course, long term, can't always count on that anyway. We can look at
Yeah,
a little bit more of a short term model here, high resolution model. I've got this pulled up as well. And this brings it on shore pretty close to the same spot. Let's see if we can move it forward here. And this is through the evening tonight and then into early tomorrow morning, the high resolution model. Sorry for the slowness here. It's a lot of stuff, a lot of streaming stuff on my computer right now. Um, but you can see moving it onshore right about that same spot and right about that same time. So we'll watch for that early tomorrow morning. But I mean, Tallahassee's just going to get pounded. But it's really about where that eye moves onshore. That's where that surge
Yeah,
is going to make a huge impact,
and if
just to the right of
and,
it.
and if the rapid intensification overnight verifies, it will likely travel a little farther to the west.
Well, I mean, there's really nothing
Yeah,
keeping it from
no,
intensifying.
there's
It's
not.
that water. We've been talking about that for a while. It's incredibly warm. And it's just this is kind of worst case scenario. But like I said, hopefully a less populated coastline, there's some benefit to that. So the they always put out their key messages, the Hurricane Center does, and it's important to look at these always as the major threats, the major impacts. Of course, storm surge is always the big one, and then these longer term impacts. People don't always prepare for power outages down the road. So even if you live well inland, just watch where your watches and warnings are. Pay attention to those watches and warnings because those really give you a good idea as to what to expect there in your area.
Yeah, folks in southern Georgia, eastern South Carolina, eastern North Carolina should be making plans for several days without power. Worst case reasonable scenario. We're not giving all the bad scenarios. The
Mm.
worst case reasonable scenario could be several days without power in those areas.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm in South Carolina. They've already canceled school for the kids for the next couple of days. So preparations are being made even in those spots that aren't under hurricane watches and warnings. Well, Matt, anything else you want to add before we log off and let people go about their day?
Oh no, just stay with the National Weather Desk because we're tracking the storm and we'll have the pictures to go along with it
Yep. Matt and
with
I
everything
both have
happening
decades of
overnight tomorrow
experience
morning.
tracking these things. So we've
Yes,
got you covered. And we'll bring you updates here, kind of nitty gritty, less glamorous view here of the storm, but certainly good information we'll bring to you.
absolutely.
Awesome.
Nice.
All
Stay
right.
safe, everybody.
Yep. Have a good one.